Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a guest with us. Her name is Mona Castaneda. She is a Feng Shui consultant, speaker, and author who helps people create homes that support emotional well being and renewal. Using her 9 steps to Feng Shui system, she merges ancient East Asian spatial principles with modern design to cultivate balance, clarity, and positive energy in any space. For those navigating grief or seeking forgiveness, whether towards others or themselves, Moni's approach provides a tangible way to shift energy at home, fostering release and inviting new beginnings. And so, without further ado, Moni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me over, Chris.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really excited for you to share your story today with us, and
Yes,
I'm excited to learn a little bit more about your feng shui system.
yes, yeah, of course.
So,
Yeah, so main reason, I wanted to be here having this conversation with you is that I wanted to talk about the grief that you feel when you lose a person from whom you were estranged, right? Because some people try to deny you your grief or even deny you the right to be grieving. So what happened is my parents, right? My father was very abusive my whole life, and my mother was neglectful. And I moved to the United States in when I was 28, right? Actually, this summer is going to be 30 years since I moved here. And even after I was an adult living my life in the United States, I was born and raised in Ecuador, which is a little country in South America. And the abuse continued. So they would, when we would have phone conversations, those conversations were abusive. They send me horrible emails, just saying horrible things. And what happened is when I had my first child, and I suffered from postpartum depression and anxiety. It was really, really bad. And I finally was starting to get better. And my husband got offered a summer job in Ecuador. So at the time we were living in Iowa and he was studying to be a chiropractor. So he was offered a job, and one of the perks of the summer job was that he could take the family with him. So he could take me and the baby, and I thought it was such a great opportunity for the family to meet the child. And immediately, my parents they sent me an email telling me I shouldn't go. They had decided I shouldn't go, and I just had a baby, right? Because I hadn't lost the baby fat, and they say thing they said this thing that it took me a week to decode, because they said, we hope you no longer have a stomach, because that is really bad for your health. And I was trying to figure out like what word they were missing, like were they saying, we hope you no longer have stomach issues, because I had stomach issues after the birth. um I was trying to figure out, and then it hit me, like 7 days after it hit me, they mean a belly. I had just had a baby. My
mm,
baby was 5 months old, right? And my father was always obsessed with me not gaining weight. He had convinced me that I was obese when I weighed 107 pounds, right? And so there was like, yeah, it's crazy,
wow.
right? There's a lot of insanity there. There was a lot of abuse when I was growing up, and some of the abuse continued, the verbal abuse continued. And so I noticed I was starting to get depressed again. And so I decided to write them an email. And in the email, I told my parents that I definitely wanted them to be part of my son's life. I wanted him to have a relationship to the grandparents, but they should treat me with respect, like I had always treated them with respect, right? And the email was not offensive. I just kind of stood my ground and I said, okay, I respect you as an adult. You need to respect me, because I cannot be giving my child an example of being trampled over, right? And my parents never replied to that email. When I tried to call them, they hung up the phone. When we finally went to Ecuador, they wouldn't answer the phone, they wouldn't open the door. I actually went to their house and I had my baby in my arms. And my cousin was with me and she was very loud knocking on the door and screaming, come open the door. And so then finally my father came to, there was like the doors for the garage. There was a little slit and then there was the door to the house, right? And so he came to that little slit and he told me, come closer. And he said, your mother and I have decided we're not going to ever communicate with you again. And I said, do you not want to meet the baby? And he said, he can come see us when he's 18 and can come on his own, right? And so my parents estranged themselves from me. And it was like the best gift they could have given me because as they I was no longer in communication with them, I noticed every single month I was better physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I was becoming happier and happier. And I can tell you, because when you grow up in Latin America, nothing is more important than family, not even religion. Nothing is more important than family. And so I think that I would not ever have taken the initiative to say, I'm going to disconnect from my parents, but they did it, right? And it was such a blessing. So time went on and I kept waiting for them to initiate, right? And like try to fix the relationship, and they never did. And decades passed, right? Because that was in 2014. And no, that was in 2003. I'm wrong, 2002, because my baby was 5 months old, right? And so for decades, I didn't hear from them. And when the news came that my father was sick and he was deteriorating, I kept waiting that he was gonna want to talk to me. He was going to want to say goodbye, and he never did. He passed on, and he acted, from what I could hear from other people, he acted like I didn't exist, like he never mentioned me. And that was pretty shocking. But the relationship with him had been so broken from so early that I didn't really feel grief. I just, honestly, I felt relief. And then my mom was still alive, right? And I had kind of told myself the story that my mother behaved with me the way that she behaved because he made her, right? And so he died in late 2020. She died in late 2021. And that year showed me that she was not being forced by him to behave with me in any way, that she felt the same way he felt, and that she wasn't interested in me at all or in my children. And so when she died, that's when I did feel a lot of grief, because I was grieving everything that I thought was that wasn't, right? So I had had this illusion that my mom adored me and she was just not allowed to express that adoration because my father wouldn't let her. And so I grieved for the loss of that relationship with my mother that I thought I had, that we never had, because I did absolutely love her a lot. And so I also grieved for the loss of opportunity, that I would not have an opportunity to have a relationship with her, and that our relationship was unresolved, And I had at the time, a woman who was my closest friend at the time. She was so cruel to me. And she told me that I didn't have a right to grieve, and that I should be ashamed of myself because I didn't show any compassion to my parents, and that I have never forgiven my parents. And actually, I have forgiven my parents, right? But I mean, they got estranged from me. It wasn't my choice. And so, and I remember she sent me these texts, right? Or text after text after text, where she was telling me that I was a cruel person, that I showed no compassion, and that my poor mother and father had to suffer a lot from me. And after that, when I saw that kind of cruelty, because she had been through really tough things, for over 6 years of friendship, and I had always been there for her. And the first time I needed something, the first time I wasn't the strong one, she just saw me down and she wanted to kick me even more, right? And that's what I wanted to talk about, because it is, some other stories are more straightforward. When you lose a parent that you had a really good relationship with them, everybody understands the loss and everybody understands the grief. But when you lose somebody you were estranged from, people think that you don't have a right to do any kind of grieving. And it's still grief, just a different kind of grief.
That's wow. I'm a little bit speechless. There's a big chunk of your story here that's just fascinating to me. I can't believe your father body shamed you, number one, after having a child. That's typical for,
Yeah.
what most people don't see because TV portrays things very differently, but women
Mhm.
go through a big body change for 2 years, not just when the baby's born, but also going through a lot that
Exactly.
first year
Yeah.
after. And so that's a natural part of that process.
And I think it probably not. A lot of it is that in movies or TV shows, you see the person just had a baby and they lost all the weight, like shortly after. And it's not like that. You still kind of look pregnant for the next few months.
Well, one of my questions I had from you for sharing the story that you just did, when you were growing up with your parents, were they emotionally or verbally abusive even when you were around them growing up, or did this happen when you moved away?
No, they were always abusive. So my father, he was physically abusive. He was verbally and emotionally abusive. And I mean, it was really, really bad. And my mom was more on the neglectful side, right? Um, but my extended family on my mother's side was heaven. So I had that contrast, and I've written about that in one of my books. That I had two childhoods. I had that contrast of whenever we lived with my grandmother or whenever we lived across from her or really close by, I had that extended family of people who thought my brother and I were the greatest gifts to the world that God has sent, right? But no, in our nuclear home, there was always abuse towards me more than my brother, and it was really debilitating. When you're a child, or at least I did, I fantasized when my father was saying horrible things to me. I thought I would say, "That's not true. I'm made of butter." I remember thinking that I'm made of butter, and anything you say doesn't stick to me. But it did get to me, and I could see, like in all the different stages of life when you have suffered abuse, um, different layers of that abuse come up. Like when you get married, when you have a child, and as your children go through the different stages of life, and, things get moved. Yeah,
What was it like raising your child? Because that's supposed to be a happy moment of life where
yeah,
people come together. And I had a similar fallout issue with my in-laws when I had my child, so I'm familiar with that to a degree. But you had to raise this child without that family support, and I'm really amazed that your mom and dad didn't even want anything to do with your child at that point, because to
yes.
say he can come back at 18, that's missing a big chunk of life at that point.
It is hard to believe, right? It's hard to believe that people would be so ugly and so disconnected from love in any way, right? And so I had my first baby, and then 3 years later, I had another child. So I have two sons, and my husband and I, my husband, he came from a broken family. His father abandoned them. They got divorced, and we made our best effort to raise a happy family, to have a functional family, and we did. Of course, we had a lot of help because we had the luck that when we were very young, we got exposed to teachers and different styles of living that allowed us to raise our children happy and healthy. For example, we were exposed to certain healing therapies. I had learned to cook as a natural food chef, and so we were able to create our children healthy and happy. But it was difficult. It was difficult because a lot of people don't realize the privilege they have had when they came from a functional family, that they do things automatically, right? Like it's natural for them to care for the child. It's natural for them to provide for the child. They don't have to uh, fight their own demons inside, right? And my husband and I have sometimes talked about certain stages in the growth of our children who are now 19 and 22. Through certain stages of their development, we kind of felt a little bit jealous, of the childhood they had, and just the confidence they have, the security that we did not experience because of the circumstances when we grew up. But we consider it like a huge win that we have had in life, that we were able to raise a happy, healthy, functional family when we didn't have a reference from our
I,
own experiences. Yeah. And a big part of that was actually feng shui.
I find that so fascinating
Yeah.
to hear these stories of people like you that have gone through a very abusive upbringing, and even to that point of bringing life into the world, still dealing with that big challenge, and then having your parents just cast you aside in life at that point because they just did not want to give you respect in any way, shape, or form. And to give your children a life that you always sought growing up but never got. I think that is just such a big gift on top of having a child in the first place.
Yeah. So like any person who decides to break the cycle of abuse, they're kind of left broken in a way, right? Because part of how people deal with abuse they experienced when they were children is by passing it on, right? When they get mad, they take it out on the kids, and that makes it easier to release negative emotions, right? And when you decide to be that parent that breaks the cycle, you have to learn how to deal with those negative emotions in a way that doesn't impact your child. And so that's where the challenge is. Yeah,
That's just incredibly powerful. And the other part I wanted to talk to you about because you brought it up when you were sharing your story is
yeah,
that I don't remember who it was, if it was a cousin or somebody around you, but saying that your mom and dad had to go through so much grief in a sense because you weren't around in their life and that they somehow, suffered because of that one in many ways that was their own doing and their own creation of things and it sounds like you made an effort to try to have a relationship with them but they estranged themselves from you. It wasn't the other way around.
yeah,
And what
yeah.
what was your response when you got told that after your mom passed?
Well, that was actually a friend that never met my parents. A friend. In over 26 years of doing feng shui, I have met the cases of 6 people who had it worse than me growing up. And this friend was one of those people. So she has suffered extreme trauma when she was a child, and I had been there for her whenever she shared what was going on. And then she was in an abusive marriage, and I kind of held her hand while she was going through that, and I supported her in every way that I could, for her to become more independent, and she was also raising a family. And so it's just the feeling that she would kind of side with my parents when she knew the details of how terrible everything had been. And I just wonder, maybe she got triggered by the whole situation. And sometimes when people get triggered, they take on the side of the abuser because that seems safer. And I don't know exactly what she went through, but after that, I decided I just can't be friends with her because when a person is capable of such cruelty, that's awful, right? But since you mentioned cousins, the interesting thing is that when we were growing up, our cousins thought they were jealous of us because they thought we had everything. And they dreamed of having parents like us, right? Because what happens in a lot of abusive households is that when they're in front of other people, they behave really nicely. And so when our cousins were visiting, my parents were perfect parents. They were caring, they were loving, they were understanding, but that was not the story when nobody else was around.
That is, that's something similar to my story I've had in my own
Yeah.
journey of life that you said that so eloquently that it's easier to side with the abuser for some reason because
Hmm.
it's more comfortable, but it's very uncertain for people to question what the reality of that is. And in my own circumstance, I love the way you phrased it. Your family would present a certain way in front of people outside the family to show them, look at how great we are in a sense. But behind closed doors, it's a whole different environment. And a lot of people, I think, I call that masking and coaching, where people put on a mask to say, I look this way when really it's this thing over here. And that can be really deceptive to people that have not gone through an abusive family or not been estranged from parents or not even holding space or trying to understand why you might feel the way you do. And so I think It's very hard to go through that when you have friends that just aren't willing to hold that space for you in that capacity.
Yeah.
So, what I wanted to ask you about is feng shui. How did you get into that and discover that
Yeah.
in your journey?
So when I was living in Ecuador, I studied architecture and I got a degree in architecture. And so I graduated in July. And then in August, I moved to the United States to join my husband. And once I moved here, I found out when I went to my first job interview at an architect studio, they said I was not able to practice my because the universities in the United States don't accept degrees from universities in Ecuador. And so they told me I would have to go back to school for 4 or 5 years if I wanted to be an architect, then work as an associate for another architect for 3 years, and then I could take the board exams. And that just seemed daunting to me at the time because I had just been over 7 years in school because in Ecuador, architecture is 6.5 years, and I took a little longer. And the last thing I wanted to do was going back to school. So a friend that heard what had happened, she told me, "Why don't you look into feng shui? You know, feng shui is really interesting. It is related to your profession, so that might be a good thing for you to do." And I looked at feng shui and I fell in love with feng shui. And I thought, wow, you know, if they had told me a little bit of feng shui when I was studying architecture, my life would have been a lot easier. You know, I would have understood the space better. But I wasn't as in love with the application of feng shui in the West. Because when you go and look at the buildings that were built, designed, decorated with feng shui principles in East Asia, they're breathtakingly beautiful. But what I was seeing in the West, you know, when I saw people that they told me they hired a feng shui consultant, their home is completely feng shui. I was like, invite me to your place. I want to see, right? And the places didn't even look good. They looked strange because they were using these trinkets from Asian to Asian culture that made their homes look like kind of like a Chinese restaurant. And so they might have a cabin, you know, with country style decoration. And all of a sudden you see an ornament with Chinese coins hanging from the ceiling from a red string and things like that. And so it seemed to me just, it was really bizarre the way it was being applied. And so I have a friend who is a master of ancient East Asian healing. And she told me, did you know that feng shui used to be considered part of ancient East Asian healing, just like acupuncture, qigong, tuina massage, and so acupuncture, I'm missing one, herbalism. Yeah. And so until the 1900s, until the early 20th century, feng shui was a part of ancient Chinese medicine, but then it was taken out for two reasons. One of it was political reasons, because in China, feng shui had always been something of the elite that the elite did and tried to keep away from regular people. And but also because the acupuncturists, the herbalists, they wanted to be taken seriously by Western medicine, and they thought that feng shui was a little bit too out there. And so once they disconnected feng shui from the other branches of ancient East Asian healing, things happened to feng shui that weren't good, right? So without the rigor of being able to go back to the source and double check things and make sure that you're working according to the principles of healing, they started attaching all sorts of superstitious beliefs to feng shui. And also now any charlatan could say, I do feng shui, and there would be nobody to question them, right? And no way to verify that what they're doing is actual feng shui. And so when I learned that, I decided I'm going to go back to the source of feng shui. I'm going to go back to ancient East Asian healing. So I studied with this master the principles of ancient East Asian healing. And then I started seeing, okay, what would apply to feng shui, to the spaces, right? If you would do something to improve the health of a person in the body, how would that apply to feng shui? And so I did all that research, and then I experimented to see what actually worked and what didn't, right? And so feng shui is the art of placement that teaches you what to put where so that you can be happy, healthy, and successful. And in other words, you are creating an environment where it's easy for you to be less stressed, to be more productive, and to get along with others better. And so you create this environment using the principles of healing and using components from nature so that you feel safe. in your own spaces. When you feel safe, the part of your brain and your nervous system that is the fight or flight calms down. And the part of your brain that deals with healing, growth, and learning lights up. And so the more safe you feel in your home, the better decisions you can make. So good decisions get to good actions, and good actions transform your life. And for
That
us,
is
yeah, go on.
that no, that's really beautiful that you said that. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I love that you said that you'd walk into these homes and people would just all of a sudden have like a Chinese ornament hanging from the ceiling that was just out of place. And
Yeah,
I love that you said feng shui is about creating a space that make you feel safe and comfortable
yeah.
so you can be productive. I just want to build off that.
Good, thank you.
Appreciate your perspective.
And now that you mention, like the Chinese ornament, and in some cases, they were really beautiful things, but they were just out of place with everything else. And so when people go into the homes that have been feng shui in this way, they don't go, wow, or they just go like, huh, what's going on here? This is really strange. So I didn't want to do that because of my training in architecture. Beauty is super important to me. So I wanted to create dream homes, homes that had really good energy, that increased the good luck of people, but were also nice to look at.
I really
Yeah.
like that because that's something I've tried to do in my own office space that I have. And
Yeah.
I have flags I got from somebody who was in Thailand, but they all have a purpose and meaning about what I do with
Yeah.
coaching and what I do with grief
Yeah.
and mindset. And I have a money tree and a certain bonsai tree in bamboo because it all represents parts of
Yes.
myself that keep me grounded and, promote certain aspects of healing. And so I love the idea behind feng shui of creating that environment that's safe, not just to make something look pretty or make a space look a certain way, but to create that sense of comfort. Because I do believe that,
Definitely.
I get what you say because I've been in office buildings, I've been in, I've been in homes a lot because I was in mortgages, and there were spaces I never really felt comfortable or safe for whatever reason. And then I would be in different rooms or different buildings. I went, oh, it's a nice space to be in. You
Yeah.
feel like calm in a space you're comfortable in, and you feel kind of off when you're in a space that doesn't really fit you.
Yes. And you can feel it. You can feel that difference. Like I feel comfortable and safe in this one place. And I just feel like I'm on edge in this other place. And it could be beautifully decorated. It's not about that. It's about creating good energy.
So tell me a little bit about how do we create good energy through feng shui? What's the
Well,
process we could do to create
these
that?
are the things when you're looking at traditional Chinese medicine, right? You're trying to create certain things in the health of a person. So we do similar things to create happiness in the home of a person. So you want to have a sense of wholeness, right? We hear a lot when people, even in religious circles, they talk about, I want to be made whole again, right? Like wholeness is a component of healing, but you also want to feel balanced. You don't want to live life like it's a roller coaster. You want to have vitality, right? You want to be able to have energy to get up in the morning and just naturally be tired and fall asleep at night and not have to resort to coffee and wine, coffee in the morning, wine in the evening, so just you can calm down. And so then you also want to have a sense of rhythm, right? You want to have certain rituals and habits that promote health. You want to have harmony of color, shapes, and materials. You want to make sure that your home is giving you the right messages. There's a Chinese saying, and that goes like this: all the things in your home are talking to you. Make sure they have nice things to say. So this is about controlling the messages your own home is giving you, right? If you have scary art on your walls, no matter how good it is, you're going to feel scared. Then we also want to simplify and want to raise the vibration, right? And so we do that in my Feng Shui system. We do that through decluttering, tidying up, organizing, and practicing preventive maintenance. And then you can use your home as a vision board, like how people make collages with everything they want. There's certain spots in your home that mean things that are connected to certain life areas. So you place decorations, not trinkets, really nice decorations in those spots. It enhances the beauty of your home and then also keeps you focused on the goals that you have for every life area. And in the West, when you ask people what goals they have, it's usually about money and wealth. If their health has suffered, then they will also mention health. And then if they're not already happily married, dimension relationships. So when people do vision boards, you'll see they usually put like pictures of cash, and they'll put a picture of a mansion and a very expensive car and an airplane to signify travel, and then a couple in love, and it's like 70-80% of every vision board is the same. And so what we do in Feng Shui is we want you to turn your whole home into a three-dimensional vision board, but to set goals that are attainable and that are for your highest good. So for example, so many people, I think I have only seen one vision board that a friend or clients or students have shared with me that they had, that didn't originally have a picture of a mansion, right? And mansions have bad feng shui. All mansions have bad feng shui. So the standard for happiness in feng shui is the smallish house full of people that you love, not a mansion full of staff that you have to pay, right? And so the larger a home becomes, the harder it is to charge with positive energy. And most people would be unhappy in a mansion. It's the truth. Most people dream of that's the good life. A good life is to have a really large house with a pool and a sauna. And for most people, they would get devitalized living in a mansion, unless you have a huge family or unless you are having parties and having guests all the time. A mansion would get de-energized. If you ever went to a home, this is an example, right? If you ever went to a home where they have a daily dining area and a formal dining area, and you remember that difference, when you walk into the daily breakfast area that's right next to the kitchen, it's full of life and love and warmth. And when you go to the formal dining room that gets used 3 times a year, it feels cold and empty, right? And so that's the feeling that you're going to have in a house that is too large for you, right? And so when people are visualizing their goals, it's usually a result of marketing they have been exposed to. It's not actually their authentic desires, right? And when they set their mind, when they set their intent to attain these goals that aren't even theirs, they're going to fail because it's not authentically what they want. So a huge component of Feng Shui is finding out who you are authentically.
I really like that.
Yeah.
I like that you said that, because that's something I'm very big about, not just in my coaching practice, but in my own personal life, is that when we don't align ourselves authentically with who we are, we're always portraying somebody that we're not all the time. And that can be in a job or relationship, many aspects of your life, how you decorate your house, for example, what you prioritize in your mind. When we live in that authenticity land of things, of who we actually are, things gravitate naturally towards us. It's not pushed or forced.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that, like you said, when people make vision boards, I laugh all the time, because I've done projects with people, and
Yeah.
it's always a mansion, a plane, and all these money and big things. I
Yeah.
go, well, is that actually you? Is that actually what you want? Like,
No, it's
you know,
about all
I,
the messages, because we receive over 3,000 marketing messages a day, is what I have read from marketers, right? From your screens, from billboards on the road, the radio. I mean, we're constantly being bombarded with a desire for this lifestyle that has been manufactured in a way that is unattainable. And so it's like the same thing, like when you choose, and I think it has changed for Gen Z today. You see more different body types and heights and thinness, and people who are bigger. But if you grew up like me, if you were a teenager in the 80s, then the standard what you should aspire to was a look that only 2% of women in the world have. So when you set everybody in the world to have this standard of beauty, for example, most people are going to fail at it. Like a person who is 5 feet tall is not going to be Cindy Crawford, as a famous model at the time. And so it's the same thing with houses. We're being fed this idea that you're not going to be happy, that you're not really successful unless you live in a large house and unless you have your own pool. And I have met so many people that put so much effort, for example, into having a pool in their house and never use it because they don't even like to swim, right? And so the idea that we have to have certain things because it's a symbol of status and it's not actually in alignment with your passions, who you want to be, right? And also, another core principle in Feng Shui is that you come to life with missions. So there are certain things that you came to do for yourself, to learn, to do, to experience, enjoy for yourself. There are other things that you're asked to do for others, what you're going to be and do for others, right? And there's also a lot of help that heaven sends you along the way so that you can fulfill your life missions in a state of happiness and health. And so every person needs to figure out who they are, right? Who am I authentically? What do I like? What do I not like? What makes me happy? What doesn't make me happy? And if you think about it, a reason a lot of relationships don't work out is people don't know who they can be happy with. They don't know who they can love and who can love them.
I think that plays a big role in the grief process as well as knowing who loves you and who's not able to hold that space for you. I think that's
Yeah.
a big
Well,
lesson.
grief is uncomfortable. People are not seeking to be next to a person who's going through a grief process. It's not comfortable. And that's what can lead you to feel so abandoned when you're experiencing grief, because there's not that many people who are going to be able to hold you where you're going through grief. And that doesn't mean they're bad people, right? So it may be that that person doesn't have the emotional range to help you while you're going through a grieving process. So there's the way that Feng Shui and the other branches of ancientization healing looks at how you process grief is very different from our Western views. So in the West, there's this idea of transcendence. You're going to transcend whatever happened to you, right? Whether you lost somebody, whether somebody attacked you, whether you had an illness that meant a loss of quality of life, whatever it is, they have this idea of how to transcend what happened. And that's when they say things like, you need to get over it. You need to move on, right? And so, because there's this idea that you're at this level and you just have to raise to another level where you reach this transcendence and the things that happen no longer matter because you're a different person, you're at a different level, right? But the Feng Shui perspective on dealing with grief is transmuting. And transmuting is the transformation of something in its essence to a different essence, right? And so when we're working with grieving in Feng Shui, we're never expecting the person to get over grief, because any person who has gone through trauma or who has experienced great grief is going to tell you, you cannot get over it. It's never not going to be with you. There's never going to be a day when you wake up and that's not with you, right? And so the idea in Feng Shui is that you're going to transmute grief into nostalgia. And nostalgia is that bittersweet feeling that you have when you look at the past, right? And so when you first lose somebody, so for example, if you had a grandmother that you really, really loved, or a father that you really, really loved, and near the end of their life, maybe they had an illness, and that illness was debilitating, and it broke your heart to see them suffering and in pain, right? And then they pass on. And for the first months after their passing, all you're going to have is tears, right? Whenever you think about them, you think of the last days of their life, you think about their suffering, or you think of how much you miss them. Like you just miss them so much, right? And there's only grief. But there comes a day, and for some people, it may be 6 months, 9 months, a year. It's different for each person. But there comes a day when you think of that person and you smile or you laugh, right? So, for example, you might remember how your grandmother was this prim lady, but she cheated when playing cards, right? And so, or something, you may remember that your uncle used to take you fishing. And so you think about that person, and the first thought that comes to your mind is something sweet that they did or something funny they did, and you smile or you laugh. And that's when you are getting through this transmutation, right? Where the grief becomes nostalgia. And like somebody said recently, that the beautiful memories that you have are always going to outlast the grief.
I couldn't agree more
That's
with
what
you on
we'll
that one.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I try to tell people in the Western culture that this concept we have of getting over it and letting go and moving on, it doesn't
Yeah.
work. I've I've talked to about 98 people on my podcast, and not
Uh-huh.
a single one of them has gotten over it. Not a single one of them has, just said, "Oh, it's this thing that happened in the past, and I'm okay now." And that's it's this idea of
Exactly.
it's this idea for some reason that people think they can emotionally separate themselves from it, but you know, you were estranged from your parents over 26 years ago. I mean, and you still to this day can talk about it. You still can remember how you feel about it or how you were made to feel in that moment. So
Hmm.
getting over it doesn't really exist, but it's learning how to navigate with it moving forward and understanding that
Yeah.
you're still going to have moments that you either get triggered by something or a memory comes back to the surface. It's always about giving yourself space and permission to grieve along your journey and as you go forward.
And the pain transforms you. So one of my healers say, pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice, right? And so the pain you go through, it kind of turns you into a different version of you. So the thought that you could get over something and just go back to the way things were, that is childish, honestly. It's ignoring and that something happened, you know. And I wanted to share with you, if that would be okay, two things that we do in Feng Shui
Mhm.
to help people process grief. So one is something that one of my mentors in Chinese medicine and acupuncturist taught me, and it is how emotions can be cleansing and they can be healing, right? And so she said, whenever you feel that you are assaulted by an emotion that brings you down, and I don't like to call them negative emotions because missing a parent, missing a grandparent, a parent, you know, missing anybody you lost is not a negative emotion. You know, it's just a reality of
Mm-mm.
life. You can't call that a negative emotion like fear, right? But when you get an emotion that overwhelms you, follow the body. And so when this emotion comes at you, your body wants to do something, right? Sometimes you want to put your hands in front of your face. Sometimes your shoulders come down. Sometimes you go into a fetal position. You know, like follow what the body wants to do for a few seconds. And then come up, change your position, and pretend you are a tree. And there's two ways you can do this. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay,
Yeah.
the camera got a little bit fuzzy on my end. Okay, so you can do like the mountain pose like they do in yoga, where you're standing when your feet hip width apart and you have your hands facing the front. And or you can do like the star pose where you bring your arms up, but not actually like a star pose, but like a Y. So you pretend you are a tree, right? The idea is you pretend you're a tree. So you have your hands up and you're standing and you treat the emotion as if it was wind and you are a tree, right?
Mm.
So you're going to let that emotion pass through as if it was wind going through the foliage of a tree and just let it go through you as if you were made of mesh, kind of, right? And you know that the wind is going to take any dried leaves, any dead branches, the wind is going to lose them and they're going to fall to the ground. And you just let it pass. And it works wonderfully. So first, you know, you let yourself feel the emotion and you follow what the body wants to do for a few seconds. And then you change your position, like you stand in mountain pose or you do like a Y, and you pretend you are a tree. And the emotion is that wind going through the foliage that's going to be cleansing and clearing. And it's going to take out whatever needs to be taken out of your system. And so only the vital parts of you remain, if that makes sense. And I use it myself and I use it with my students and clients, and it always works really well.
I think that's a beautiful exercise, and I really love your perspective on emotions because that's something that I teach people is that emotions are neither good or bad, but what they are messengers for us. And they're messages for us to learn something we need to hear within ourselves. And so when we label emotion good or negative, we associate a feeling with that emotion, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where sometimes we will miss an opportunity when we feel that emotion. For example, if we say I'm sad, and somebody says, well, being sad's a negative thing. Well, now we associate sad with negativity when
Hmm.
really it's not negative. It's actually a good thing for you to actually
Natural,
acknowledge
right?
it.
And so
So,
in Feng Shui, and one of the there's a belief that there's certain emotions and certain sounds that help with those emotions, right? And so the emotion or the sound for grief is weeping, crying, weeping, especially when it's not muted. When you're actually making yourself allowing yourself to make the noises that come with crying, and the crying releases the grief, right? It calms it down. So that was the one thing. And then the other thing that I wanted to share is they used to be in China, right? They used to have, they still do or practice some form of ancestor worship, which is basically honoring your ancestors or your loved ones that have passed on, right? And so they used to do, they used to take these tablets and they would write with calligraphy the name of the person that has passed on. And then they would keep these rectangular tablets in their altars so that there was always a presence of the loved ones that are no longer here, right? And somebody was telling me who's from China that eventually that got lost because of photographs. So now when you see that the families do this practice of ancestor worship, they have the photographs of the people who passed on, right? But it used to be their names on tablets. And one thing that my students and clients have found really helpful is calligraphy and embroidery, right? And so
mm,
you can, for example, get somebody who does really beautiful calligraphy to write their name in a very small, it shouldn't be large, right? So for example, 2 by 7, or about the size of like a dollar bill, which would be 2 by 6 or thereabouts. And so you have somebody do a calligraphy of their name, and then you have it matted and framed, and you put that in a very special place in your home, depending on your beliefs, your religion. If you have an altar, you can put it in your altar, right? So it depends on what people believe. And another way to do that is to embroidery. So you can hire somebody to embroider their name. And the same thing, you put it in a mat and you put it in a frame. But it works even better if the person does the embroidery themselves.
that's really powerful.
Yeah,
I never thought about the difference as you brought that up, that people would use tablets back in the day, and now we have
yeah,
photography. So that changed a little bit over time with technology. Um,
yes. But
and
but I think the name is very powerful. And for a lot of people, like, and I know there's a lot of cultures where you put a photo of the people you love that you have lost. But for some people, looking at the photograph, especially in the beginning, is too painful. And every time they look at the photograph, they cry. And so for some people, it may be better to just do the name for a while.
I think that's a good idea because grief is very overwhelming at times initially when you experience it. And so
Yeah.
giving yourself permission to say, when I'm ready, I can make an altar with a photo. Some people like me love photos up front. So we look at them regardless. So it's really, I love that this is a journey for you to discover on your own, what's comfortable for
Yes.
you at whatever stage of grief you may be at.
And you
Um,
need to have alternatives, because not everything is for everybody. But if you make your home safe, that makes a huge difference. And another thing that I recommend you do, and again, you may not be ready to do it in the beginning, but if you have experienced it, a huge loss, right? Um, Changing the arrangement of your home can make a very big difference.
hmm.
And so, and I'll give you an example of a little loss, right? My younger son, he left the house, he went to live with his girlfriend. He's very happy. He doesn't live too far from us. But for us, whenever we walked by his bedroom, we cried because there's his bed, there's his blankets, there's everything, right? Because he moved, he didn't take the furniture in his room. And so one of the things we did is we changed the arrangement of the bedroom. We changed the bed cover, and we put the bed in a position where it gets more sunshine. So our cats jump on the bed and they take their sunshine there. That changed, from the feeling of, oh my gosh, he's left us, he's living by himself. Every time we walked down the hallway by his door, now we see a cat, and a cat on a really beautiful bedspread, right? And so, but that's a little loss, and this is one that really transforms into nostalgia immediately, right? Because your child has left home, but he's very happy, he's doing really well. And so it's easier to make that transition into nostalgia, but also you need to make changes in your home as time goes on, even after a big loss, and it may be changing the orientation of the dining table. If you have a rectangular table, it was this way, you turn it 90 degrees. It may be changing the colors of the curtains, it may be repainting. And you can go little by little, because otherwise you can get overwhelmed with the memories.
I don't blame you for saying that, because that's what I struggle with in my grandparents' house, because my grandfather died, and there's all these things around the house that are really reminiscent of that. And I think sometimes having too much of that in a room can be very overpowering in a sense, and not so
Yeah.
much for the nostalgia purpose, but it can pull you a lot further into
Yes.
that
Yeah, it
place
kind
of
of can
grief really
transform
hard.
you. I mean, transport you in time, right? And sometimes it means that you're going to put some things in storage for a period of time, and then you bring them back.
Exactly. And that's what I love about that, is that you don't always have to have things out. You can put them away for a minute and then bring them back. And sometimes that bringing back part of the process will add some renewed purpose and bring back some good memories, and not just the reminder of, the loss that you had. Moni, I wanted to ask you, as we get towards wrapping up the podcast, I know you wrote a couple books.
Yes.
I saw them behind you. I wanted to give you a couple minutes to share that with us.
Yeah, let's do that. So this book, Room by Room, Feng Shui Secrets for a Happy Life, this is a book of stories. I have written other books that are manuals on how to feng shui, but this is stories, right? So this goes over 4 generations and 3 homes. So the 4 generations are my grandmother, my parents, my husband and I, and our children would be the fourth one, right? And the 3 homes are my grandmother's home, my parents' home, and our home. So my grandmother, her home was full of happiness, vitality, and love. And she had good feng shui. Like, my grandmother never studied feng shui, right? But she had an intuition or an instinct to do things with good feng shui. And so, like, the good feng shui went with the functional family. And then my parents, they wanted to break every single rule of how you organize a home. And the home was really dysfunctional, right? And so when we um, got a home and we had our kids and we're raising a family, we're like, okay, how can we create environments where happiness happens, right? Happiness needs a place to happen. And so how are we going to organize our living room? What are we going to do in the dining room? How are we going to decorate the kitchen? To create functionality, to create beauty and good relationships, good memories, right? So, like, happy memories begin here in our home. And that meant, for a while, our living room was a jungle gym. Because they were little, and they were bouncing up and down, bouncing off the wall sometimes. And then when we decided to homeschool the kids, the living room became their classroom. And once they decided to go to school, that the living room had to change, because otherwise I missed them too much, right? And so at every stage of life, you continue changing things. But if you create places for happiness to happen, the happiness does settle there. And so that's the one book. And then this is my most recent book. It's The House of Many Gardens, Feng Shui Secrets for a Happy Life. And this is mostly about my grandmother's home and how she cared for her gardens. And because she lived, the first home I remember was a home that had been the estate of a vanity farm. It was like the kind of farm that people had just for to have fruit trees and things like that, but not actually, they were farmers, right? And so this house had been built in another era, and at some point it was in the country, but the city had grown around it, and the house was left, with almost a block of gardens and with a busy city around it. And that's where my first memory, the first house I remember. And so it had been really well designed inside and out. And so I go over all of the aspects of creating beautiful gardens and yards that you can actually enjoy by using her home as an example. And of course, we also tell stories of how we did things, right? For example, we did, one day my kids came and asked if they could borrow a tablespoon. I gave them a tablespoon. And they dug out a hole in the backyard. And then they kept making it big until it was the size of a bathtub, right? And they used to, it would get full of mud, right? And they would go and sit there and come back completely covered in mud, right? So these are the kinds of stories that fill your heart for a lifetime, right? Like when you're raising kids, and it's probably silly, right? It's silly that you're gonna dig up a hole that's like an outdoor bathtub where you can get mud baths. But those are the, for my husband and I, giving the children that kind of freedom was super important. That they would grow up knowing that they are loved, that they are respected, that their wishes are respected, and that even if they want to do something silly, as long as it is not harmful, that they're allowed to do it. We wanted to raise them with freedom, right? And so I tell some of those stories here. And also, because Ecuador, Ecuador is about the size of Colorado. It's on the equator, and it has the Andes Mountains going through it. So the city I grew up in is 9,200 feet above sea level. And even though it's only
Wow.
20 minutes away from the equator, it's cold most of the time because of the altitude, right? And so I talk about this growing up in a place that where nothing works the way science books tell you it's going to work. So like I'm going to school and I'm reading books about the four seasons, but we didn't have four seasons. I'm also reading that the sunset and sunrise change throughout the year, but for us it didn't change. Sunrise was always at the same time, sunset always at the same time. And so reading books and looking at around me, my reality didn't match, right? Like the instructions on the side of boxes of pasta, for example, didn't work because they had been written for sea level. They didn't work in the mountains. And so that I grew up very skeptical because of that, and that was extremely helpful when I found Feng Shui, because I didn't just take any information at face value. I was always like, okay, we're going to test this and see if it actually works, right? But the book also talks about some of the shamanic practices of the indigenous people of Ecuador, about some of their beliefs regarding hummingbirds and trees. The relationship with trees is very special. And trees in Feng Shui are the symbol of for wealth.
I really love that. I have a big fascination with trees. I don't know why, but I
Oh,
love
that's
that
awesome.
they're
Because in Feng
I
Shui,
love
trees are considered the people of the vegetable world. And when you sit under a tree, you make a full energetic circuit. So you are connected with heaven and earth when you sit under a tree or you take a nap under a tree or do Tai Chi under a tree. And it's not just like, that beautiful feeling that you have when you go sit under a tree. The tree gets that too. You make the tree happy.
Well, Moni, I just want to say a big thank you for sharing those books with us today. I know that you spent some time working through a lot of your upbringing, a lot of your experience, and to be able to put that into books and share those beauties with other people in the world is just a big, powerful gift. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing those with us.
Thank you so much
Um,
for
where
giving me this space.
where can we find those books if we want to get them?
Okay, so if you go to my website, which is 9steps2fengshui.com, you're going to find on the menu the link for books. Now, a lot of people don't know how to spell feng shui. So I also have spacearrangement.com with no dashes or spaces, right? Spacearrangement.com takes you to my website, 9steps2fengshui.com.
I love that. And I was going to ask you as we wrap up the podcast, what is one thing you would share with somebody who's going through grief or maybe feels stuck in grief, what they could do to navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
First, don't beat yourself up because you're grieving, because that's a natural process. It would be strange, it would be wrong for you not to grieve, right? And to give yourself time and make a few changes at home and try to increase the level of comfort at home. So it may be getting a new comforter, it may be getting a throw blanket for the living room or having different cushions or a nice rug. So look for softness, right? Look for what can you wear, where can you sit that you feel embraced by your home.
I think that's excellent advice. And Moni, I want to ask you as well, if listeners want to get in touch with you after listening to the podcast, where can they find you?
Well, they can contact me through the website, spacearrangement.com, goes to 9stepsfengshui.com. But they can also find me on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and Pinterest with at Feng Shui for us. So that is at FEngshuiForUS. So no
Perfect.
.com. I think I said .com. So at Feng Shui for us are my handles for most social media.
Perfect. And for listeners listening today, I will have all of Monet's social links and also her website there so you guys can visit. I hope you go check out her website. It's a really wonderful piece to look at. And also go check out her books and learn how to make your space feng shui in your home. I think what I've taken away the most from hearing you today is that there's so much we can do within our own environment, our own space in our home to make ourselves feel more at comfort and more at peace, especially as we're going through a grief process, and to also just give us more better energy as we navigate our life. Because I think, as you said, when our energy is out of alignment and we're out of our authenticity of ourselves, that's where we run into so many challenges and so many issues in our life. So the more that we push ourselves into our alignment of who we are and where we're supposed to be, I do think that's the beauty of where life comes together for us.
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. Well, thank you again for being on the podcast. It was a real pleasure to get to talk to you
Thank
today.
you, Chris.
Yeah. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Moni and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Moni's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone in this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.